Hey, what is up? I'm Spear and today we'll build a Sine Pluck. It's one of my favorite sounds to use in songs, and the patch that I made for the Reason 9 sound bank called Sine Pluck is actually one of my favorite patches that I submitted for that update. So I thought I'd make a quick video outlining the thought process that went into making that patch. So first up, here's how that patch sounds. It's just a very simple and straightforward kind of patch, but I find a lot of inspiration from it just when jamming out with it, which is why I like it so much. So if you want to rebuild this, you will need a combinator. And inside that combinator, you'll want to drop a line mixer 6-2, and under that, we'll drop a maelstrom and also a Thor. We'll use the maelstrom to generate a transient and the Thor to generate the body of the pluck. Splitting the transient and the body gives us a lot more control over the sound. For example, we can use reverb only on the body, making the whole thing a lot smoother, because there isn't this kind of high frequency reverb coming from the transient. But if we want the maelstrom to generate a transient, we want to make sure that the transient doesn't actually change in pitch when we play different notes on the keyboard. So we want to go into the programmer of the combinator, select the maelstrom, and deselect the receive notes option. So right now, only the Thor actually generates any kind of sound when we play a note on our keyboard. We will now use the Thor to trigger a generic note on the maelstrom every time we hit a note on the keyboard. And we can do this by opening up the Thor, reducing the release on the mod env all the way, and then bringing down the decay on the mod envelope to a very small value, like 5 milliseconds. Now we'll route the mod envelope out the CV output 1, and then we'll grab the CV output 1 of our Thor and route it into the gate input on our maelstrom. This now triggers a generic note. I think it's C3, not sure. But we can change the pitch using the oscillator on the maelstrom anyway, but it'll always generate the same note whenever we hit a note on our keyboard. Now you can't hear it on the sine wavetable on the oscillator A on maelstrom right now, but we'll fix that now anyway, so you'll hear what I mean in a second. Because now we'll switch the wavetable on oscillator A on the maelstrom from sine to FX drip. And now you can hear the very short decay on the mod envelope on the Thor always triggers the same kind of drip sound on the maelstrom, regardless of whether we play a very high note or a very low note. And that's exactly what we want from our transient. Next up, we're going to bring up the motion on the drip all the way to 63, which leaves us with a barely audible click. We can change the length of that click using the decay on the mod envelope on the Thor. Somewhere around 13 milliseconds leaves us with a very clean kind of clicky sound. It's quite low, so you can bring up the volume on the maelstrom and then mix it on the line mixer. Another thing that you can do is route the oscillator through to the filter A and low pass it, so that the very kind of high hissing sound doesn't get through and you're left with a very kind of smooth click. I'm actually gonna shorten the decay a little bit down to 5 milliseconds again, which leaves us with that very kind of snappy click. Alright, that's it for the transient for now. We'll now move on to creating the body in the Thor. And the first thing you'll need for a Sine Pluck body is a sine wave, so we'll switch the first analog oscillator to a sine wave. Then we'll switch the filter to a state variable filter here in slot 1. And we'll switch the mode of the state variable filter to a notch filter with the low pass high pass balance nudged towards low pass with a value of about 30, which means that we now basically have a low pass filter that also acts as a notch. We'll bring the frequency all the way down, and then we'll bring the envelope amount all the way up. Now we can make changes to the filter envelope. We'll bring down the sustain all the way. We'll bring down the decay a little bit to about a second, and we'll bring down the release also a little bit to about 2.2 seconds. And we'll use very similar settings on the amp envelope. But because we already have a transient coming from our maelstrom, we can bring up the attack on the amp envelope just a tiny bit. So I'll bring that one up to about 10 milliseconds, make that 11. And we're already getting somewhere. I noticed that my transient is still very high on the high end, so I'll bring down the frequency on the low pass filter a little bit, which makes it a bit smoother. Alright, there's still lots of work to be done. We'll bring down the release on the amp envelope a little bit here, because I think the plug is a little bit long. But now let's shape the sound a little bit more. And to do that, we'll actually bring down the drive on the state variable filter all the way to 0, and make the filter envelope control it, so that when the filter is at its most open, the drive is also at its highest. So we'll grab the filter envelope in the modulation matrix down here, and route it with an amount of about 80 to the filter 1 drive. Which is a subtle effect, but it does drive the sine wave a little bit. Then we'll turn on the shaper, we leave it on a soft clip mode, we bring down the drive to 0, and we will also make the filter envelope control the drive on the soft clip with an amount of about 72. Yeah, 72 sounds fine. And we'll route that to the shaper drive. And that's basically the basic setup on your sine. We will still add another filter in the third slot, and it'll be a high pass filter. We'll make sure that we don't have too many low frequencies in this kind of sine plug, because it's very easy to get some very kind of low, mid, heavy plugs if you rely on sine waves when you play lower notes. So we'll bring a high pass filter in, but the frequency is fairly low at about 150 Hertz. And now we're getting somewhere. We can now embellish the sound a little bit using the delay on the Thor. We'll just turn it on, tempo sync it, bring down the time to 2/16, and maybe bring up the feedback a bit. Which is quite nice. You can of course always balance the transient body mix up here. I have the body up all the way, so I'll just bring up the master volume on the body a little bit so we have more room to play on the mixer. This is a fairly subtle kind of step, so I don't want the transient taking too much attention from the body. But there's one more thing that I'd like to add in the Thor to make this a little bit more lively. And what you can do is actually add another analog oscillator on another sine wave, but on the exact same pitch, so same octave and everything, as oscillator 2 on the Thor, and then route that with an amount of about 20 to oscillator 1 FM. That introduces some frequency modulation into the sound, making it a bit more interesting. Sweet. Last but not least, and you've probably noticed what is missing, is the reverb. So we'll drag in a reverb as a send effect on our line mixer. And you can pull up the film score preset here, which is always a safe bet. It's basically just a very big hall, all on 39 meters, room shape 3. And we'll make some modifications to the frequency spectrum by enabling the EQ on the reverb unit, switching to it down here, bringing down the lows some, and then reducing the mids at about 700 Hertz a little bit. And then we also want to bring this up on our mixer, but only on the body channel, which is the Thor. Cool. Now, you can of course start playing with it. I have an instant urge to bring down the frequency on the transient a little bit more, just to make it even more subtle. But if I mute it, you'll notice that if it disappears, it will sound like something is missing. But maybe this kind of smooth fading in sound is what you want. So you don't necessarily need the transient. I like it a lot because it adds a certain kind of edge to this Sine Pluck. Alright, before I get into jamming, I'll probably end this video, so thanks for sticking with me. This is how you build a very basic Sine Pluck. In the patch that I made for the sound bank, I do some things with equalizers and compressors, but it's basically just like reducing some of the lows on the sine wave, which we can basically achieve with the high-pass filter as well. And on the transient, I do some shaping on the top, but using the low-pass filter has a very similar effect, so don't bother about that. You can definitely compress this, which might be a good idea. You can squash it a little bit so the reverb is more prominent and it's more of an ambient kind of sound. So with a very low attack, you could really squash this. And but that's for you to decide what kind of sound you want out of it. I like the kind of smoothness of this vanilla setup with only the Thor and the Maelstrom and the reverb. And you have a lot of control over the dynamics of the sound anyway, because you can choose how loud you want your transient to be. Well, this is probably not the best choice. Alright, I'm getting lost in this. Anyway, as I said, better end it now before I start. Yeah, you know what I mean. Have a good one of whatever you're having, guys. I'll see you in the next one.